Hello everybody, welcome to the 5th KCA People webinar, which is all about company culture and just how critical it is to the success of your business. A subject central to all that we do here at KCA People and to our HR partner Claire Merton, who is going to share her thoughts on this key issue that all organisations, whether small or large, need to embrace. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Kirsty, for that. So, as Kirsty said, today I'm going to spend some time talking to you about what I think is an absolutely fascinating topic of company culture. I'm going to touch on why it's important and ultimately what are the benefits of having the right company culture in your organisation. But before I do, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about me. So who am I? Well, I'm Claire Merton and I'm an associate of KCA People. I've worked in HR, learning and development for over 20 years. I can't quite believe I've got to that point. But over my career, I've had the opportunity to work in different industries, and that's really given me a breadth of understanding about different environments, but ultimately the impact it has on people. And you can see there some of the different businesses and industries that I've worked in. I suppose importantly for this topic, it means that I can talk to you about different cultures and I have some understanding of the benefits of different cultures in different organisations. I'm really lucky because I love what I do. I've had the opportunity to work as a HR director in numerous roles. I've also been part of executive boards and they've had different ownership models. All of these have been about me supporting businesses with people plans, depending where they are on their journey. And I'm not always a HR professional. When I'm not doing that, I'm not being a mum, then I like to run with my favourite playlist on. And also you'll see from that picture, I like to play a bit of netball. Okay, enough about me. We're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about company culture. So you can see in front of you there the agenda. As I said, company culture is really a fascinating topic to me. It's fascinating in the fact that it can impact how a business operates and also what happens to customers. So today I'll touch on some key points around what actually is this company culture. When people use the word company culture, what do they actually mean? I'll talk about why it matters and what happens when it goes wrong. I'm quite sure we've all been in situations where businesses have had a poor company culture and we've all experienced the impact and negativity that can bring. I'm also going to cover some information about different cultures. So it isn't a one size fits all. It's a different culture dependent on the business, perhaps their goals, perhaps the industry they operate in and what they're trying to achieve. So I'll give some examples of those and the different types of cultures that can be required. I'll also talk about the ways that you can improve your company culture. And like with anything within business, it's always important that you can measure what's happening. So I will provide some information on how company culture can be measured. So there's the agenda. Now, if you do have any questions as we go through, please feel free to pop those in the chat if anything springs to mind, and I'll certainly try to answer those at the end. Okay, so let's get going. So let's start at the beginning. What is all this company culture about? Well, I like to describe it as it's a way that we do things round here. It's how it feels. I think company culture is something that you can sometimes even feel. So if you ask people in the business, what they might be able to use is some descriptive words. Sometimes you'll hear people say things like, the culture is honest, perhaps it's open, perhaps it's customer focused, friendly and supportive. It's also true, sometimes people may describe their culture as less positive. You may hear some negative terminology, perhaps toxic, perhaps words like unhelpful. But you can definitely describe a company culture. You can see from the definition here, it's about beliefs, values and attitudes. And I've got to say, I think a culture of an organisation is best tested in difficult times. Do people still stay honest to that culture, those values and beliefs when things get a little bit difficult? It can sometimes be described as the way the business feels. It is definitely can be described as a set of values, and often companies use a set of values to be able to describe their culture. But I have to say to you that it can not only be words alone. A culture comes to life when you see it in action. So actions are definitely more important than words when it comes to company culture. Okay, so why does company culture matter? It can sound quite subjective, but actually it's not. It can be something that is very objective, and I'll tell you why. I think sometimes when I'm trying to articulate my point, what I find is easy to do is talk about something in the extreme, perhaps a less favourable example. So when we talk about culture, and as I mentioned before, we might all know when we've had an experience in a poor company culture. And if you've worked in an environment like that, what you'll see around you is people who are quite anxious. They might actually be fearful to make decisions because what they're worried about is that they'll get the blame if they get it wrong. And sometimes there can be an awful lot of gossip, people backbiting. That would be described as a culture, in my mind, certainly, that wasn't positive. But you know what? When people get it right, you see the absolute opposite. You see people around you who are engaged, committed, and wanting to do the right thing for the organisation. It's really likely that productivity will be high. People will be committed to what they've got to do, but importantly, they'll know what they've got to do. Decision making in a business where there's positive company culture will happen because people will know they can make a decision, which means things can move on. And even if they do make a decision and potentially they get it wrong, they will not fear blame culture. So ultimately, businesses will be able to move and operate more efficiently. Where there's a positive company culture, what you will see is positive well-being, because it's a supportive environment and people feel that they can come to work and be themselves. Overall, really important for businesses is that there'll be increased employee turnover. Increased employee retention, not turnover. And that is because you'll have people wanting to stay, wanting to be part of the business, and wanting to support the organisation. I've got to say, if I think about those two descriptions, I certainly know which organisation I would personally work in. Okay, so that's all well and good. We can perhaps agree that we all want a positive company culture, but sometimes these things are easier said than done. So let's have a think about, first of all, what is a company culture influenced by? Well, you can see from my slide there's a couple of things, or quite a few things, that influences company culture. Let's start with beliefs and behaviours. This is seen in the way that employees are treated. It can be the way people are spoken to. It can be the way that people are respected and how fellow colleagues treat each other. It's also about the way in which customers are treated and if they're put at the heart of decision making. I think often beliefs and behaviours can be best tested when there's a disagreement to be resolved. So when there is a disagreement, actually, are our beliefs used at the heart of making those decisions and actually coming to an agreement? Or is it, in fact, the opposite? A value system. So a value system is often defined by a set of values, some descriptive words. Again, these can be tested when there are decisions to be made and sometimes when there's money to be spent. Are companies true to their values in difficult moments or when it may cost them something to stay in line with their company values? It sets a barometer for decision making. Management strategies and management style have a huge impact on company culture. So if you have a management style that is hierarchical and people only find out information when you feel it's time for them to, that's going to be very different to a management style that is open, inclusive, and wants thoughts and opinions of their people. I also think employee communications is really important. And actually, when it comes to employee communications, are people involved? Are they informed? Are they consulted? And actually, are they involved before decisions are even made? Or actually, are they dictated to? The employee relations and communications, whether they're two-way or one-way, will have huge influence on what it feels like to work in your organisation and how much you care. A huge signal to me around how an organisation feels about its people and ultimately the culture of care is the actual working environment. So what is it like to work in this space? Is it conducive to doing a good job? Importantly, when people go for rest, is there adequate space so people can take a break before returning to work? Huge indicator of the company culture and what it thinks about people is their working environment. And lastly, attitudes. So when we think about attitudes, I think about attitudes towards each other, attitudes towards the business, attitudes towards customers. Is it supportive? Is it caring? Is it a feeling of we're in this together? Or actually, is it a feeling of negativity and pointing out mistakes of each other's? All of these factors can contribute to the company culture being either positive or less so. So here's some facts about company culture. I always like a few facts just to articulate the point. And so I looked at a recent Gallup survey to get this information to be able to share with you. So the survey was really clear that company culture is important to job seekers. Just less than half of job seekers indicated that they thought that company culture was a factor in choosing roles. It went on to say that 86% of job seekers would actually avoid a company with a poor reputation for culture. And millennials will prioritise people and culture fit over everything else. You can see from the other two facts that what's really important is that talented people will make decisions about who they work for based on the culture of the organisation. And actually, people will even make decisions and decline job offers if they think that the organisation has got a poor company culture. Mm. So here's some examples of businesses who have said to have got it wrong. So I mentioned before about sometimes it's easier to articulate a point by thinking about things in the negative. So I think Amazon is a really interesting case, isn't it? Amazon, one of the most successful businesses, and ultimately Jeff Bezos, one of the most richest people in the world. But when you think about the culture of Amazon, we've heard words like bruising, relentless, churn and burn. And when we look at Uber, there was an article in the New York Times which called the Uber company culture aggressive and restrained, actually putting results over teamwork and not caring for people. I'm not here to say whether these are true or not. I have actually no idea. But ultimately, what I'm here to demonstrate is that articles, information and talk of bad company culture impacts reputation. And actually, it might not just stop employees coming to the organisation. It's fair to say that customers make those decisions too, because they want to actually buy or work with businesses that are ethical and treat their people well and have that positive company culture. So I've talked a few times about this poor company culture and what that might mean and what would a toxic environment perhaps look like. Well, I think, first of all, what I would say is that if the company culture is poor, you're very likely to have people who are working for you who will be stressed, feeling anxious, and ultimately, from a business perspective, feeling like they can't come to work to do their best. So, excuse me, here are some examples of businesses and signs that you may have, or a business may have, a poor company culture. So a lack of core values. It could even be that this business has core values on the walls, perhaps even in documentations. But in reality, if they don't follow those values, they don't follow those beliefs, then ultimately they won't benefit the business at all. They'll just simply be on a piece of paper. You can also find that the environment is very unfriendly. It can seem very competitive and people gossip about each other, perhaps feeling that people can't be honest because there's an element of backstabbing going on. This definitely creates risk and creates uncomfortable situations for employees. You often also see in these types of organisations that businesses are working late, individuals are working late. They feel the pressure to be there, perhaps late into the evening or even at weekends. Sometimes in these organisations, presenteeism can be prevalent because people thinking that they've got to be seen at their desks as opposed to looking at how they achieve things through actually delivering. I've mentioned a couple of times now that it might be employees are showing physical signs of stress, but how that might manifest itself in work is disagreements, perhaps arguments in meetings. It can be very unpleasant to come to an organisation where people aren't getting on. You might find managers are actually publicly humiliating and critical of their employees, as opposed to taking responsibility for the actions of their teams and supporting them to improve. And I think ultimately, overall, what you would see is a business where there would be high employee turnover. I've worked in a few regulated businesses, and this type of environment would be a problem for a regulated business because it's highly likely that all of this would mean those negative behaviours will mean that customers are likely not to get the best outcomes, and actions may not be taken in their best interests because actually the systems and processes and culture doesn't allow for it. I think ultimately it's probably really clear to see that all of these are bad for business and very unlikely to provide a committed, engaged and motivated team of people supporting your customers and delivering for you. So let's go on to say, what are the things that we can do to influence this company culture? What are the physical things and what are the invisible things? I think that diagram really clearly demonstrates there are things that, let's call it above the line, as you see on this diagram, that are visible, that help drive company culture, and they're actually probably easier to change. But in reality, some of those things can be short-lived if some of those things below, beliefs, values and assumptions, are not in place. So harder to change, but actually probably bring greater benefit in the long term. So if you look at artifacts can definitely demonstrate company culture. But if all the other things are not in place, then they're probably likely just simply to catch dust on the shelf and will not be true to the heart of the company culture. So they can enhance it if things are in place, but you should definitely not rely on artifacts on their own. Behaviours, they can definitely be seen. They can definitely be seen between individuals, managers, and equally customers. And if behaviours people aren't doing the right thing, then behaviours can definitely be discussed. People can provide feedback and they can understand how to do things in a better way. But if some of those less favourable and those less visible things aren't in place, just giving feedback to one person without all the framework behind it may in fact not have a long-term benefit. There is no doubt in my mind that metrics will drive company culture. Let me just articulate that a little bit better. So if you had an organisation that was focused on NPS, so customer surveys, customer feedback, that would be a very different culture to an organisation that is only focused on profit and making sure they hit the bottom line. So the metrics that you have in place will absolutely work for or potentially against the company culture. Now, I'm not suggesting that businesses wouldn't have profit as a metric, but all I'm saying is those metrics need to be rounded to make sure decisions are made in the light of the company culture and values. So below the line, these are beliefs, values and assumptions, and we touched on these before. But for an organisation to be true to these, what they have to have in place is an intentional framework. So what are the beliefs of the organisation? What are the values and what are the assumptions that we make our decisions on? That framework needs to be put in place. And if not already in place, a good place to start is talking to colleagues and customers about what the right beliefs and values are for the organisation. That framework will help embed the right culture for the organisation. They can be embedded into processes, policies, and how the business operates. And we've already talked about KPIs and metrics, and definitely any of those things that are put in place do need to have a set of metrics to make sure they're happening. Again, that could be NPS, that could be customer feedback, that could be competency frameworks, exit interviews, all opportunities to ask yourself, actually, are these beliefs, values and assumptions embedded into the organisation? I think what is also really essential is that those beliefs and values are taken into the boardroom, and decisions that are made at the top are made in the light of that company culture. You can't just use your company culture and values in the good times, because actually your company culture shows up in the experience that your customers see and feel. So it's really important that any decisions that are made consider the values of the organisation, the beliefs of the organisation, and make sure they're made in that light. So I said before that there are different types of cultures and they are different for different industries. And perhaps I might have worked in a few. So it's definitely not a one size fits all approach to company culture. What you'll see on here is 8 different cultures that potentially might be right for your business. Let me just take you through them and just provide some examples of the types of businesses and types of industries these might be appropriate for. So first of all, adhocracy. This is a high risk and high reward. This might be a business that's likely to operate where there is lots of competition, new ideas. Clan culture is when we're all in this together. A clan culture is very much about a family environment, and perhaps it's been in the business for years. It's very much about loyalty. Customer focus is a business where the customer needs come first. You often see this in the service industry. Retail is where customers are, the business is customer focused and the values align to this. Hierarchy, stay the course and don't rock the boat. Hierarchy is built on process and authority. You might see this type of culture in a manufacturing environment. If you look at an organisation that needs a market-driven culture, it'll probably say things like, we'll make it or break it. This might be the technology or innovation industry. Purpose-led culture, sometimes you'll see in consulting firms and professional services, very much about this is the purpose and the purpose is our why and the way in which they will operate with their clients. Innovation culture is all about constantly getting better. So again, this might be technology, perhaps something around sustainability or even the EV market. And last but certainly not least, creativity. Share creative ideas to solve problems. Perhaps this might be the arts or marketing. So you can see there are very different cultures depending on the environment, depending on the industry. Now, just to bring this to light, for example, if you had a hierarchy culture, but actually what you were trying to drive was innovation and you were trying to drive ideas, new ways of thinking, a top-down approach is very unlikely to mean that employees will come up with new ideas and challenge the status quo. You're probably likely to find people who are following rule. So if you're wanting to work in a market where you need innovation and new ideas, that type of culture, if in place, would need to change. Let me just take that a little bit further and explain to you about a little bit more about these 4 types of cultures. So it's okay for me to make the statement that those cultures and what they seek to achieve, but this diagram shows you a little bit better what the business might be focusing on. So let's have a look at the diagram. If you look at the top, you've got flexibility and at the bottom, stability. And on the left-hand side, a focus around internal, and on the right-hand side, a focus around external. So depending on the business, depending on the market, and what the business wants to attain will be dependent on what might be the best culture. So we talked before about clan culture. So this is an organisation that will be fostering collaboration. It's probably a very family-like feel. We like to call it our family. We like to say we're all part of a family. We definitely value commitment, participation and allegiance. This type of organisation would be wanting to focus externally, but also create flexibility. If we look at Adocracy, this would be very much focused, still wanting flexibility, but starting to look externally. And this might be the sort of business where you want to decentralize the leadership model, because what you're trying to do is make sure there's individual innovative ideas and organic decision making. Then if we move towards the organizations that are looking for greater stability, thinking about those cultures, you may want to focus on hierarchy, where the business is focused internally and looking for some stability. So more structure and more top-down approach, and perhaps some stricter processes in rules. And lastly, thinking about a market culture would be a business that was focused on stability, still looking externally, and perhaps wanting to have an atmosphere of strong competition. Again, it's important to say, you can see it certainly isn't a one size fits all, and organisations change and move with the times. It might well be that a family run business that started off with a clan culture gains investment, starts to try and innovate more and wants to take a market into a different place. If that is the case, then it's highly likely the culture would need to change, and all the ways of working, the processes, the competency frameworks, the way in which the management style was articulated may well have to change. So cultures should change as the business changes and the business model changes, and that needs to be considered. So I've talked a lot about the company culture, why it's important, the different types. So now let's have a think about, actually, what are the ways in which we can improve company culture? It's really important that you find people who are going to fit into your company culture. One culture will not suit everybody, and that's okay. The benefit, if you can describe your company culture, means that when you are working with, you are recruiting people, you can describe it, you can tell people what it's like. First of all, they can make decisions about whether it's right for them, but also you can make sure it's right for them as well. So making sure you've got the right people coming into the organisation who fit your company culture, really important. Values, like as I've said, they can't just be on a set of documents, they can't just be on a wall. They have to be integrated into what people do every day. So what I mean by this is, if there's a service industry, and the values of the organisation should appear in the way in which employees talk to their customers and interact with their customers. Perhaps it's about recognition schemes and the way in which people are valued for the actions that they take. But it's really important those values are integrated into everyday activity. It's also key to foster more feedback. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you've got a company culture, you know what it is, you've got a centre of values. What that allows you to be able to do is give feedback to individuals, teams and managers when those things are going well, or perhaps they're not going well. Encouraging that feedback will really help improve a company culture. My view is that feedback is a gift, and if received in that way, can have a real benefit to the organisation and individuals. Keep up with changes. What do I mean by that? Well, as organisations change, make sure that your company culture still aligns what you need to do. And if systems and processes are changing, make sure that those values, beliefs are embedded into those changes. So the company culture, the values continue to be part of what the organisation needs going forward. Learn how to change a broken company culture. So if you do start to see signs that I talked about before of a more toxic culture, if you're starting to see increases in people having time off, if you're starting to see that you feel that people are getting more stressed, you have to ask yourself, what's going on? What's happening here? What do I need to do? Is there something that I need to change? Make sure that you're holding yourself to account with those things that you know are important to defining and showing that your company culture is turning up every day. Reward a job well done. If you see people behaving in a way that's aligned to your company culture and your values, then tell them, reward them. A behaviour that is seen and rewarded will be repeated. And actually, if that is told to others, they will also start to understand how things need to be around here. One of the best ways to make sure that things continue, so recognition and values being rewarded will be really key. Recognise individual contributions. So if you're looking for innovation and ideas, how do you recognise that to make sure that people understand you want more of the same, and also recognition of what people have achieved? Look to retain talent. When you've got people in the organisation that are aligned to your company culture, make sure you're focused on them and how you retain them. How do you make sure that their career paths can be aligned so that you retain them in the organisation and keep them doing that great work, embodying the company culture and values for your organisation? Champion teamwork and collaboration. This is going to make sure that there is two-way respect for individuals, and also that employees can work collaboratively together to achieve the outcomes of the business aligned to the company culture and what it's trying to achieve. And lastly, but not least, create flexibility. Understand that individuals have different needs, and within your culture framework, ensure that you can create flexibility for individuals that they need to be able to come to work, to be their best selves, and ultimately perform for you in your business. So lastly, I just want to talk to you about the things that you might want to measure to make sure that your company culture is positive, and you can continue to monitor and make sure the things that you're putting in place are impactful. And if one of those things wasn't to be as positive as you wanted, you'd be able to take action. So employee turnover. Accept that company culture is just one factor of employee turnover. But if you're seeing areas of your business where employee turnover is starting to increase, you could ask yourself, what's going on here? Is this as a result of a team working against the company culture, not in tune with the company culture, or is it something else? Employee advocacy is always a good measure of company culture. What do I mean by employee advocacy? So are employees advocating the business as a place to work? Are they advocating the business for customers? And would they recommend their friends and family to use services of the business? That is a positive sign of company culture and can be measured through surveys and NPS scores. Exit interviews, you can quite simply ask the questions. What was the company culture like? What would you do to change the company culture? And perhaps if you've got values, actually ask direct questions about those values in the exit interviews to see where the organisation is living those values. Absence percentages, where you're seeing increase in absence percentages, this can definitely be a symptom of poor company culture and potentially a toxic environment. So keep your eye on those absence statistics. Look if people have got high levels of stress and ask yourself, what's going on? And then lastly, employee relations. So where you've got positive employee relations, you've probably got a high and positive company culture. Where you're seeing lots of disciplinaries and grievances, perhaps things aren't going so well. And it's time to ask what's happening in terms of that employee relations and collaboration that you would want to see in the organisation. Okay, so that was my whistle-stop tour of company culture and the benefits of it. It'd just be opportunity now to see if there are any questions on any of those topics.
I think you've wowed everybody, Claire, with with what you've been talking about, and it is a fascinating subject. And I've always been of the opinion that a fish rots from the head. So if you want to understand why the culture of an organisation is as it is, you look at the people at the top of the tree. And in my experience in recruitment over the best part of 40 years, this has proved absolutely spot on time and time again. I won't bore you with all the stories I could tell you, but it's just fascinating. And of course, it's human behaviour at the end of the day, isn't it, really? Yes. Which is a never-ending, fascinating topic. And to watch people and how they behave in certain circumstances is just mind-blowing sometimes. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no questions, you will obviously get a copy of the slides anyway, and you have our contact details, so please don't hesitate to get in touch. And if you'd like to discuss certain aspects of this further, we're here to help always. So in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And we will be in touch about our 6th webinar, I think, which is going to be at the end of June. So we will look forward to seeing you all again soon. And thank you again for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kirsty.